Good evening, everyone. Welcome to another Absolver EU stream, specifically Sunday Absolution with the 2MK team. Today we are once again using our quote-unquote filler content until DNF Duel is ready to be played on Sundays. As for the two who were attacking me before in this spot, if y'all wanted to be on stream, then let us know in thing, but double teaming is generally the way to get on people's good side, in case you didn't know. We begin once again today with the Sun and Rune Siren. And their match can begin basically immediately. I'll try to keep count properly this time. I believe Sun is testing something new today, but not exactly sure what. It's not all as clear as possible. If you haven't watched any of our previous streams on this game, the main thing to understand about Absolver is that it is a more or less build your own fighter style, sort of open world. Let's call it a fighting game because there's really not much else to call it. It has all the frame data, it has most of the same styles of stats. It has most of the same styles of fighting, honestly, but since you can build your own basically from scratch, with some limitations but not many, there's not a lot to say in those terms. You can't say this character fights like this. At best, you could say this player fights like this, in terms of style and so on. Other than that, it is generally what you'd expect from a 3D fighting game, let's say. With the main difference being that there are no throws, and that your stamina is used up both by moving and by defending. There are a couple other differences which I'll probably mention as they come up later on. And unfortunately, due to the way that the system turns out, it's harder to get people into the area, so you can't just walk up to the courtyard in the EU stream and assume we're going to be there. We're still working on that, but it wasn't necessarily worth putting a lot of effort into fixing, given that we're basically only streaming this content for another month, probably. Know these players' styles in other games, it's really obvious why they fight the way they do. And it is now 2-1 to Sun's side. My camera work is improving, but still not the best. However, if you want to get a better look at the main system, you'll probably get that when I'm actually up for my match, which from the look of it will be another match with Sun, which will also break up the group somewhat to make things a little bit easier. So, onward. At the moment, you're seeing me do stance changes. Stance changes are required because that's the way you change the way you're going to do specific things. Basically, you have a limited number of moves you can actually activate from your stance, and therefore the stance you are in determines which move you actually get available to you. But you can change stance relatively quickly, and you can fake out your opponent and change stance in ways they might not expect using that fake out. So You can't necessarily say that you'll be able to predict what your opponent will do just based on that. 1-0 to Sun. My opponent's health has probably not fully recovered, although I don't think I did enough damage for that to really matter here. Nope, I didn't. Countered. This goes on really long now that we actually understand each other's styles a bit better. Oh. Aside from blocking, every style, of which there are 5 I believe at the moment in the game, has a specific defensive ability set and style, which causes you to react differently when... I can't really say what button you're using because different things use different things. 3-0. Ooh, invisibility. I'm sure she'll reappear in a moment. Or not, but at least it probably isn't going to affect much. So, on with the match. Mostly it just looks kind of cool. Aside from the frame data, you can expect the other standard things you'd get from a fighting game. The health is in the realm of 900 to 1000, so if you're a Street Fighter player or games of that type, the numbers will probably seem normal to you. Similar for the damage of most attacks. Usually somewhere between 40 for the quickest ones to 150 for like the heaviest possible ones. With the huge startup. But of course, since you can build it entirely for yourself, it is up to you how many quote-unquote slow special moves you have, how many quick moves you have, etc. You could try to build an deck entirely of quick moves, and that's often what I believe some of the boxer styles do. But if you actually want to learn about how to play this game or what is a good set of moves, similar things, you can definitely find resources online, and if you want to just jump in anyway without doing much of that, then there are schools which will allow you to just take the entire style from some person who is basically going, yes, this is a good way to fight, this is a good fighting style. I'm going to support everyone with fixing this deck so that they can keep on using it. The flow, though, absolutely should just be whiff punishes and everything you would normally expect. Aside from, again, the throw. In this case, we will instead go for guard breaks, and there's lots of different methods for guard breaks. Usually, though, you just pressure your opponent until they can't guard anymore and hope that your stamina for attacking doesn't run out before their stamina for defending. If you become too predictable, you'll get the DOA style situation where the opponent will do the equivalent of a hold, which in this case is just use whatever defensive ability they have. Be that a parry, armoring through a hit, dodging it perfectly, or other things that are like some combination of the two depending on which style of attack is coming at you. When you defend correctly with your defensive ability, or technically even backdash at the right timing, or use your meter as just shown, you do get stamina back, meaning that a person going for pure pressure who fails and is correctly defended will almost certainly wear themselves out before the defender does, and then be relatively vulnerable. But not to worry, even a single guard break causes you to stagger, but also basically refills your stamina meter so you can go right back to defending properly. I believe this is 2-2 at the moment. I'll mention a little bit more about meter and the uses thereof in whichever the next match is, because that's the one I'll end up in. I think they both missed with that. It is quite interesting to see the shifts that happen in just basically 2 weeks of playing this again. But that's how fighting gamers' minds work, I guess. And there we go. 3, 2. Bringing me back to facing Rune Siren again. Well, not again in this case. As you'll notice, her health hasn't fully recharged. That's a standard aspect of this game. Health does not necessarily recharge fully at the end of a match, meaning that you can't just easily beat your opponent up for 3 straight rounds. It's usually quite dominating if you did. So let's go into the concept of meter now then. The 2 shards you can see near my character's hip, now 3. Technically there are 5 of them there, but you can only see whichever ones are lit up easily. And those shards are your meter. You can basically also build your character to gain meter faster if that's the sort of thing you like. And the ability I've just used is explicitly, I'm now going to prevent your stamina from recharging for a short time. Easiest used when you want your opponent to stop attacking, since it will armor through their attacks anyway. Or you just want them to get away from you. One. Similarly, you can see that I'm more or less tiring myself out slightly at least. But not entirely. She and I both have styles that involve building up a lot of attack range so that we can get out of bad situations and still have enough stamina to deal with whatever follows. You can also just build up stamina by getting hit in weird situations. You'll notice I did regain some health. But this basically is why we treat this as best of 5. on we'll probably need to switch around some things so that our fourth member can actually get on. It's not necessarily worth explaining that, but since I won't be able to do anything else during that period... Okay, we're playing the backdash game again, so I'm going to change altogether. Since I have won that one more match with Sun, and then we will switch over. We started a little late today, but it does not matter that much. This game requires a lot of practice, as all such do. But it's all the same things you'd get from any other fighting game you're familiar with. Is it time to attack? Is it time to defend? Have I got my opponent thinking about something else other than what they were doing before? I keep on standing in my wrong defense stance. That part is a little harder to deal with than other games, because normally when you're defending, you're just defending. But it's not all that bad, because a lot of the defensive moves, the quicker moves you'd want to use in defensive situations, are from back stances. And therefore, if you are the sort of person who plays other games and gets used to, oh, I should hold back now because I'm supposed to be blocking, just figure out which of your two directions is the correct back to hold for the situation, and use that. Another good use of my meter depletion is when I run out of meter, to prevent my opponent from being able to pressure me to kill me off because I've done it. Out of range. Keeping a good distance from your opponent is a good idea simply because if you can get away with it, it's much harder to deal with people, because you have to use longer moves most of the time, and those moves will be more readable. Now, on the other hand, if you're good at whiff punishing and aren't necessarily a particularly aggressive player, then this is basically usually to your advantage. And if you've watched our other content, you basically know how this is and why it works this way. If I attack against those who retreat, then I have to do that relatively perfectly. If I don't attack, then my life is usually easier. The one who backs off more also tends to use up more of the stamina of the other. But there are definitely advancing moves that don't immediately telegraph an easy, I'm dodging this way. What they usually lack is damage. But you see another option here. While it is quite tiring to use, you can benefit somewhat from using your various blocking and meter related things to get through the situation. The other main option you have for clearing that space is to feint correctly. Feinting is simply a matter of tapping the block button mid-attack. This will change your stance as you go and get you past your opponent's quicker attacks more easily. With punished. You can see that in that point I probably should have stopped advancing. But I basically never stop advancing, so there's that. I'm now moving to swap who is in combat group. Mainly because the way the system works makes it difficult for players in different geographical regions to actually interact with each other without using some sort of school, as shown here. So since I've had a negative experience, let's say, a fight with both of those players, I now have to move them into a different position. I only get 3 people overall, so let's see if OmniRabbit has managed to find his way back to the courtyard. And the game will now put me back into invite mode. I feel like this one should work on its own, but we're still working out exactly what happens and why that is. Both players are generally called exactly to my location, so it's not much issue in that regard. But unfortunately, as noted, it's a problem because it prevents us from having more organic experiences with people in the open world. You might not always want these because, you know, they're fighting game players, they're gamers in general. Not everyone is the best in terms of whatever you consider etiquette to be. But there are always similarly a lot of people who are relatively normal. I might even go so far as to say honorable in some cases. So you could have proper matches with them. The actual process of learning moves and developing your style is done in the open world, and you haven't seen it on this stream at all, but other than that boss, I guess. And Jin Meska does in fact count as a boss. I'll leave it to these two to begin their match. But generally, moves are learned by defending against them. And when I say defending against them, I explicitly mean pretty much any defensive ability. The special ones will work, blocking will work, backdashing at the right moment will work. Even using your meter, since those tend to be, let's call it, invincible, or at least armored, when you're doing so. This can lead to a situation where you need to find an opponent who has the move and figure out the situation in which they use it, then create that situation over and over, and then go so far as to still win the fight after having defended against their move multiple times. But don't expect to be able to come in and pummel everyone in sight and it just be fine, since you gain no experience with moves that are never used, and if you just keep on beating your opponent up, the moves are never used. People in your own geographical region, you probably just need to zone in and out of a sub-area enough times to get everyone unified up into the same instance, and then you can have whatever kind of fights you want. This, for example, will never allow a 2v2 because it's too difficult to align it. The system does change. For example, if we three reach a point where we are all hostile with each other, and then zone back in and out a few times, you might get an instance where we are fighting but other people are able to enter it in the normal way. Unfortunately, because Sun is not actually within the geographical region required, we have no way to use that to bring all four of us together. But I think it probably worked out okay on that side, since Sun had like a deck change to make. And by deck I mean moves in the fighting style. Again, if you're interested in this game, there are definitely better people to ask about those things than us. Normally I give a short demo on stream at some point, but that's usually when something is broken. And nothing's broken today. You might get something in the NA stream later tonight if we have it. Cleanly done. And that means it is my battle with Omni now. Okay, let's get back into the mental state. This is my defense stance because it has my quickest attack out of it. And I can demonstrate some of this as we fight, given the opponent knows what I'm going to do a lot of spaces, but also is defensive enough that I can pull off a lot of explaining. So I'm normally moving into this stance because it's the stance from which I can do the quickest punish. Simply put. It's also a stance where if my opponent decides to walk up to me for their own quick moves, I can use the same move fairly easily. And because many of the defensive abilities in the game don't benefit as much from that position, it's a problem for some people. Similarly, if I'm not in that stance for some reason, let's say I need to move forward, and the way I've got my control set up, I can't really move forward while staying in this stance. You can absolutely do this in the game, it's just that I'm weird and don't do that. You can still do some things. If I walk forward, then I can do that. There are definitely other stances I have as ways to get into that one by feinting. Similarly, I could use the other method of feinting and get a longer, stronger attack. From my perspective, therefore, I want to be in this stance nearly all the time, and my opponent doesn't get to spend a lot of time understanding what that means exactly. There are definitely moves I don't have available from there, but I have a lot of them. I should have sidestepped that. As you can see, it gets advanced fairly quickly, and is also relatively fast. That, for example, was a different fake out because of the way my character changes stance. Even though I was in my defense stance, by taking even one step forward, I went into a stance where you get the kick instead. This is usually fairly intuitive because of the way that the moves are required to start in a specific stance in order to get something. I believe that was 3. We'll consider it 3. And once again, change enemy. But let's watch and see if it's easy enough to tell what moves are going to come from a stance in the same way. You can sort of know, like just physically, the design of the game is such that you can sort of see physically where a move is going to come from. If you want to do a big backhand, for example, it usually helps if you're standing in a back stance to swing that backhand from, which will then potentially transition you to a different stance, 1-1, where you could then follow up with another move that made sense from there. If you did a backhand, you're now probably facing your chest toward your opponent. And in many styles, it would be a good idea to go for a big wind-up punch with the other hand. You could also use a smaller punch. You could also use a swinging kick. It's up to you almost entirely. Anything that can come from that stance physically and not be like too much effort for a martial artist to use is probably available somewhere in the game. Obviously these things are within reason, but there are like 160 moves in this game, so generally you should assume you're going to get something close to what you were thinking of, which means that you can build your deck more so by imagining an entire fighting style, at least up to a point, rather than having to understand much about frame data or any of those things. And of course, since you can always tweak it later, the only thing you care about is that your character build is correct. We'll probably eventually have some other stream, maybe one of these Fridays or something, or some day where we want to do some content, but we know that there won't be enough people around for a lounge in one of our other things, for example. But you should assume that until DNF Duel comes out, if you're interested in watching people punch each other and kick each other in Absolver, Sunday will handle that for you. These two can fight for so long. I still feel like it's still 1-1. This is without basically any healing whatsoever. But I guess this is what their fights in other games look like too, so. Okay, from the looks of it, that was in fact 3-1. So here we go again. This matchup tends to be one of our most interesting, not only because Omni can parry things I do, but because of the amount of stance changes that are required for everything to work correctly. We also tend to fight very close, even though technically we are both characters and players who like to be further away in most cases. It doesn't actually work out in this specific matchup, let's say. And just like every other game, there's also the levels of thinking. I'm specifically taking this hit. There are hits I'm setting up to take here explicitly. because they put me into a stance I want to be in, while also keeping me far enough away to actually do something. Similarly, my opponent sees, oh yes, that's your defense stance, I know what comes from there. Even if you feint, if I go for sweep, because that's what we're treating it here as, heavy, crouching heavy kick. If I go for sweep, I'm going to stop nearly everything you do, so it's probably safe to just sweep. Whereas my sweep has a totally different purpose, and that one was a choice to use sweep because of expecting a retreat or a backdash. And just like any other fighting game, there are moves that you would think, why are you using that as slow? But if I'm not convincing my opponent it's a good idea to stop it, doesn't matter. Also, yes, I do actually have 2 of those flying kicks. Play it for long enough, like every other game, your body will just eventually do what it's supposed to do, even in terms of stance changes. Although I can't necessarily suggest much for people who... The game's default setup for this is not one that I understand how they expected people to use, but not everyone is a fighting gamer, and I think this game was partially designed for PC as well, so... One more pop. That, for example, was setting up for, I'm going to take this hit, I'm going to feint and make you try to interrupt me because I want to get to that spot so I can use the knee. The knee is stronger there, as long as my opponent decides to continue coming at me and not backdash. Or, technically, depending on where in the attempt of approach they actually are. Alright, I think we get one more rotation, and by rotation I mean I have to run all the way back. I'm going to assume that Sun is ready. Omni won the most, therefore is getting booted for winning, merely to just even out everyone's amounts of practice. No, Jin, I'm not interested in fighting you right now. So once again, I'm going to quickly reset this. Inviting anyone causes a reset, so I think I have to do it this way. Once I've invited Sun, it will shift everything again and allow me to re-invite Rune Siren. And while that's working, I will quickly show you the training mode, but more importantly, the stats. These stats should not be thought of as MMO stats. These stats should be thought of as fighting game stats. And what that means is fairly simple. In games like Tekken or whatever, there's simply some characters whose standard normals hit harder. That's it. If you have a character whose standard normals hit hard, you feel like the character should use their strength to use their punches and kicks, then raise strength. You're not trying to get strength no matter what, because when your character uses fast moves, the strength stat is not the stat it uses to calculate the damage for those moves in the first place. So this really is much more of a fighting game. You build dexterity if you want a fast character with fast strikes. And if they also happen to have one or two heavy strikes, then basically too bad. You can't boost the damage that much. But as a quick demonstration, we'll look at the properties of basically one move. There we go. I love that kick. You'll notice that the damage on this is about 70. It's exactly what you'd expect from this. If you are familiar with our other content at all, this is basically Chun-Li's standing medium kick, and it does about the same damage. You can also see that the damage it does is determined by specific aspects of it, but nothing I've done so far has managed to get this kick above 80. I can get it down to 60 by building a character whose stats don't match those that this kick requires, and I can similarly build entirely for that and get this kick up to at least 75 damage, I think. I might be at the higher end now and I'm just misremembering it, and it only goes up to like 70. But in general, that's what you should expect. You can basically nerf and buff yourself, usually at a price to something else. There are therefore definitely best builds in the game in terms of doing the most damage, but that's common in fighting games too. There are some characters that just do more damage and have some other trade-off, such as their speed or focus in other situations. Do I have everyone now? I do. So if you've ever had the extremely specific thought to yourself, I would like to play a Street Fighter game or a DOA game, but I want to build my own character, this game will probably amuse/engage you for a good 40 hours at least. So if you're ever considering buying it, especially when it's on sale on PSN, yeah, even without specific other people to play with or fight, you'll probably get a good 40 hours out of this. This is particularly true if you're the sort of person who plays games for the story mode, because this game isn't definitely all that high on the story mode, but the engaging aspects of it stay about the same. So, next battle. That's a lot of basics in terms of backup to tell you more information about what's happening here. Sun is, as you know, our Akuma player, and if you are familiar with Akuma, you are probably able to see some of that happening here already. With only like a specific knee missing. While the moves are not always done exactly the same way, combo cancels are possible. Relatively heavy pressure is possible. And if you're thinking from the DOA side, a lot of this could be defended. It's just really fast, and it does have enough variation that you can't be sure, which is, you know, good enough. It stops the character from being both stale and easily defeated. There's enough chase to deal with backdashy players or backdashy style characters like Rune Siren. And since the backdash has recovery, you can't both backdash and then usually successfully use your defensive ability. So even lunging attacks, which are relatively straightforward most of the time and you could just sidestep them, the fact that you're being chased in a backdash means you probably can't, making it much more important to specifically backdash out of an attack you know you're going to be out of the range of by backdashing, and not just I'm backdashing because you're at the end of a block string, for example. I'm sure for any Street Fighter fan this sounds familiar already. They're so mobile sometimes. Rune has a somewhat hard time here because Though they both use the windfall style, which allows you to dodge basically any attack in the game, it is like using four-way holes in DOA. Not only must you choose the correct timing for dodge or defensive ability, you must choose the correct direction. If your opponent swings at your head, you must crouch under it. If they attack straight on, you must go to one side. If they use a big swinging attack, it might even depend which side you choose to go. And similarly, if they attack with a sweep, you have to hop over it, which isn't really a hold in any way, but you know. Technically at this point, the stressor that you're seeing is in fact... Was that 3 already? Looks like it was. That's probably a backdashing thing that's happening. Alright, here we go. It is therefore similarly not always in your best interest to continue your combo, let's say. If you think your opponent's going to keep defending, there's no need to keep pushing. You could just assume you're going to get something out of it. It would take me quite a while to go through literally every reason everyone has the moves they chose in this game, and in the spaces they chose to put them, but that sort of thing is kind of the point. It wouldn't be as interesting, or let's call it original, a game if that wasn't the sort of thing you had to spend lots of time thinking about. Armor through the last hit of the spinning air kick. You can also, of course, basically create your own longer special moves in similar ways. Using the feinting system rather than the main one. You can change moves that normally don't link into each other by putting a move between, or rather in the combination, let's say, where that is what will happen. So I get to do that, and then choose to go high or low by not so much the button I press, but whether or not I feint in between them. And similarly there, I can continue to use that knee, but what exactly follows that knee is basically I get to choose by execution. I was so sure I had meter before then. No, I didn't. It was a block stun or something equivalent to block stun. I think that was 2-2. Looks like it. Or at least if it wasn't, it is now. That range was off. Because this opponent will punish me for sweeping at that range. And block. From my side, I was able to see just now, Sun was absolutely ready to beat the second air kick. Specifically to duck under it. That was not what I expected you to do there. Good job. But this is the opponent that I have the most trouble tricking normally. If I think too hard about what I'm going to do, chances are Sun has already thought of it first. Caught at the edge, huh? Within our group, since we tend to fight from further away, you'll notice that the shockwave that keeps on coming out is a relatively standard choice for your meter, but you don't need to use it. There's healing. Gravity, which you might see Rune Siren use occasionally, which is more important for disarming your opponent, but it does slow them down, so if you are mid-pressure, you can prevent them from being able to keep on escaping from you. And Sun, as you've seen, the green flash you occasionally see is armor. Being able to just hit through other people's moves, especially their quicker and weaker ones, without being interrupted at all. Which, for a player who uses the occasional very committed heavy attack, can be really strong. There are even stronger ones further on into the game, but even those I would not say are fully meta as an option. But just know that you can definitely get some extra concepts. There's an earthquake, which I think normally is similar to the shockwave. It will normally defend you, stop your opponent from doing things, but keep them close to you instead. So sometimes if you are a closer range fighter and don't need to create space, that might be your better option. You'll get all these things just by going through the game's quote-unquote story mode. So you don't really have to think too hard about whether or not you'll have access to any given one or have to grind super hard to get those, unlike your moves, where the most special moves, particularly the ones with the longer animations, you might have to find the spot in the game where it comes from. Generally, the enemies are not too much threat. You can distinguish which ones are and aren't from how much health they have, and that's usually a color thing. I think they're still supposed to be going. Well, we've now got the scenario of this setup, and we're going to test one more thing before we end the stream for today. Since we do have a couple more weeks of this, and I was planning to spend more time trying to advance my understanding of how to get people into other situations, as there are many people out there who are much better at this game. And as with all fighting games, if you want to learn a lot, you either fight people who are better than you, or try to understand what they're doing. So let's all run off this time. And technically this will be preparation for next stream anyway. As we're no longer in that status, the thing that will probably happen here is that when we cross through this area, at some point, Sun will desync from the rest of us. Which is unfortunate, but eh. But if not, it allows us to quote-unquote move to the next spot. What it normally prevents, though, is it still has like a single instance going on, so there's a decent chance that we still won't encounter other players, simply because we started in this way. The three of us here are in an instance that other people cannot enter because of the geographical restriction on one of us. Unfortunate, but it is obviously also the sort of game where you would want to minimize situations where people end up losing via lag, you know, like any fighting game. And since it doesn't have true matchmaking in that sense, this is the truest matchmaking you're going to see. Alright, this is normally our most complex one in terms of zoning. And nope, we still have sun with us at this point. Please note this game contains fall damage, as demonstrated there. I'm not sure if that was enough of a fall that we are unable to revive. But also you can fall into ravines that are just straight ravines and then you can't do anything. But in this case it still did not actually cause a full desync. NPCs! A quick demonstration of this then. Purple health. Purple health meaning this is apparently someone whose head I can stand on. But aside from that, purple health enemies, treat them as where you test your strength and your moves, fight them mostly seriously. They'll not compare to players, they wouldn't even compare to bots, strictly speaking, if I were to make any, if that was even possible. But because they have a lot of health, you can actually test whether or not you can do anything correctly. Orange health is similar. If you're at the red health enemies, they're mostly there for you to learn moves so that you don't get killed before you finish, like, confirming the experience thereof. But we have now reached this spot, which is going to lead to this wonderfully slanted combat zone for next stream. And you know I'm just going to call the stream On Tilt. Nevertheless though, that brings us to the end of today's stream. As I said, I really don't expect anyone to even be able to join this instance anyway. And if you hope to join us at all, then head here, mainly because the NA stream does not contain our geographical issue, and we probably won't even need to fully coordinate, which means that any pile of people appearing in this zone are at least capable of joining in, assuming that they are, you know, actually doing so in good faith. Tomorrow you can join us for our usual mishmashing Street Fighter V Battle Lounge, possibly both of them. And on the next day, Melty Blood, the Tuesday Melt. We may not this week have Wednesday Night in Birth. Different things are happening, people are moving around and some changes, but it's possible that we'll have it. We're less likely to have the EU one, but even that might happen. And of course, on Thursday, there'll be Feeling Thursday. I'm not certain that we will have any content for you on Friday, even though we are working on bots, as it is approaching Combo Breaker weekend, and there's multiple reasons why the team will probably be cheering, trying to help whatever they can through whatever means they can. For all of you going to Combo Breaker, good luck. I hope none of your combos drop. That's the bare minimum I think everyone should aspire to have at your tournament. You may not be the best there, but it sucks when your combos drop, so I hope that no one's combos drop. Now Saturday will probably be more 60 times Dead or Alive, and unless there's a sudden DNF beta, you can expect to see us again for Sunday Absolution, both later tonight for the NA and next week in the same slot for both. This has been Rillian for Team 2MK. Good luck with your training and good night, everyone.